Good afternoon, everyone. So we're going to continue in the work session mode with our look at comprehensive rezoning and the process that we're going through at the current time. Would like to thank everyone for coming around the table again today. And Linda, I'll pass it to you because I think you're going to kind of go over a refresher of things and kind of take us from there. So.
Absolutely. So this is the items that we were hoping to be able to discuss today for our meeting. So to add to your binder, we prepared just a couple more items for you to include. So we're going to use this items for discussion, which is the first thing that you'll see at your seat. So a refresher of our December 13th meeting. It's been over a month since we've convened. So just to kind of touch base on what we worked on last time. And then there were some revisions and some additional items that we were looking into from that meeting. That's in your packet, and they're 3-hole punched. So that is the field verification issues we talked about with the non-conforming uses, and then restructuring the heavy manufacturing and production and the light manufacturing and production. And then we're going to pick up with our discussion. I think we ended right at the beginning of the use table, and then we'll talk about the next steps. Also included, which will be a discussion for our use table, was a comment that we received from Lou Mangione regarding the C2 that would be relevant to this discussion today. So our discussion last time, we talked very briefly about how did we get here. We talked about the adoption of the Freedom Plan and the Master Plan, that we began this process several years ago, and kind of the timeline moving forward. We outlined that we're on the text portion. Following the text will be the mapping portion. We reviewed the major changes that were taking place with the new code, and that we are now going through as a group together the text in detail, and then we're going to be going over the use table next. So that just is a very high level of what we covered last time. Again, having some pretty good discussion on the districts themselves and the definitions of artisan manufacturing, bulk requirements, butcher shop, all of those things we went over, and we made notes and changes were applicable. And so with that, from the last meeting, which is in your 3-hole punch, are the field verification issues. And then the following issues that were identified needing adjustments by the concept team, and the issues that remain. So, Mary, would you want to go over this portion since you prepared this for them, just to kind of go over?
This handout here is really just a summary of our process, who was involved, when we did it, how we did it. I mean, it's important to know we did not go inside properties. We based all of our review on what we could see from the street and what the signage indicated. So those are possible drawbacks in our results, if there are any. And then I summarized a few of the issues that we brought back to the concept team and corrected, if you will, and then the following issues remain. And I'll just quickly go over those. Linda had brought up at the last meeting that I believe that because we are eliminating what's called pass-through uses, we will no longer be allowing dwelling units in the commercial districts, and that will create some non-conforming uses. And that is something that when you get to the use table, you probably want to discuss further. Mini storage facilities also was something, they are currently permitted in the BG with a number of requirements. We recommended, and the Planning Commission agreed, that they should be permitted in the C3, the highest level commercial, but conditional in the C2. We've identified 2 existing, and I believe one that's going to submit a site plan, that will be in the BG going to C2, so would need a conditional use or they would become non-conforming. So we wanted to bring that to your attention. Also, another pass-through use that we've seen is contractors' equipment storage yards, which are permitted by conditional use in the Ag District. We identified 2 that came through since 2015 in the BG. They will become non-conforming. And then also, any uses that have occurred over the past year, because we wrapped this up last January, we're not sure. I mean, we haven't done this in the past 11 months. And also, again, as I said earlier, if something if something else is going on inside that building that we didn't know about legally, they would become non-conforming. But we did our best. We used all the information at our disposal to do it. So we wanted to summarize for you so you had an idea of what our process was and how we got our results.
And that's just based on a recommendation, so if you don't agree with the recommendation from the planning commission, you can change it. I mean, you have the latitude to do that. So if you decide that for some reason, mini storage should be permitted as a principal and not a conditional use in C2 for various reasons, then that's what these discussions are about. So this is just based on the recommendation forwarded to you all by planning commission.
And on the back, you have definitions of the non-conforming rural village. Did you want to?
Yes.
Does that help now or later? I don't want to.
No, thank you.
Well, the non-conforming, that's the definition straight from the zoning code. And I won't read it for you, but what it does mean is that something can continue, if it's legally existing, can continue in use. It can even expand, I believe up to, Jay, 100% with BZA approval. It's just.
So it's sort of a grandfathering.
It's Tom.
Sort of.
I hate that word.
It's a recognition of
Thank you.
uses that are currently in place when you make a change.
Yes.
But if we have a non-conforming use, does that only go to the current owner of that particular property? Because now they sell it later?
No, it goes to the use or a
It's the
similar
use.
use.
So if you sold a building to someone else and they were using it for the same thing, as long as that use continued, it could stay the same. The only time it would stop being allowed to be used is if they stopped using that use on that property for more than a year.
So let's say in the instance of that, they would put the property up for sale. It wasn't being used at that time because it's for sale. It took over a year for it to sell. What happens then?
You can ask for an extension of that non-conforming use. There is a section in the code that does allow for that. If a property is actively being sold, you can apply for an extension for up to a year.
Do we want to do that? I mean, it sounds like we're creating loopholes in the process. When somebody is using his property that's, non-conforming but allowed, and then they have the ability to sell it for that still same non-conforming. I mean, when do we say stop and let's do what's right, as opposed to allowing that property just to be, continue to use in a non-conforming way?
A lot of things aren't black and white. There's a lot of gray areas that kind of come up that we don't never even think about, and that kind of covers those with the zoning administration.
Yeah, but it's opening up Pandora's box for every time we, people can get into a loophole, they can keep it that way, and then it's just a non-conforming.
Well,
What we want to.
As long as they're in the same loophole, they're, continues until that ends.
Yeah, but that's my whole point is I want to minimize the exceptions and, put things in accordance with, our regulations as opposed to continuing to allow for these, again, I'm using probably the wrong term, loophole, but these exceptions to continue.
But there's so many of them that we can never foresee. That's the problem,
I believe that our zoning code is rather liberal on the use of non-conforming compared to other districts. I think, if I recall years ago, that there were many other counties allowed them to only last for, till the next transfer, or different ways of forestalling them. And if the board wanted the team to look at different options for limiting the existence of non-conforming use or the continuation of non-conforming uses, certainly we could do that.
And I would. It's not to be so restrictive to limit business growth and development, but it is to keep us conforming to processes that we're putting in place. If not, they're not worth having. So I would look at being somewhat more restrictive in a second or follow-on use or sales. I mean,
Right, I agree, that's why I brought it up. Because I think if it's non-conforming use, as long as you're the owner of the property, okay, we made the exception and grandfather you in, but, and that's fine. But once you either sell the property or you stop using it, then it goes to whatever the zoning is in that area. I just think that would be a better way to handle it, this is my opinion. But I think we should look into what other counties are doing with that exact thing.
We'll also look at the municipalities, so I don't know if we want to be totally out of line with the municipalities as well. I think they actually take their cues from us, so we'll research that and what they do as well. Because it could be interesting, especially in the Westminster area where they extend water and sewer outside of their corporate limits, and then, you know, I know this has come up where they had in your industrial a karate studio, and then another karate studio wanted to follow in, but it was a different ownership, but it was meant to be industrial land, so, and then there's a similar property like that right across on the county side, and so there could be just some confusion and problems with that, so.
So if there are many karate studios out there?
Next to nail salons.
It's a good adaptive reuse of sometimes,
Yeah,
more
warehouse building
desolate,
and things.
industrial.
See what else is.
And then rural villages, that could be very challenging. Rural villages are community crossroads. We have 36 of them throughout the county. They're actually designated priority, as a type of priority funding area. The issue that we have found is all of the residential and rural villages, I will say pretty much in full confidence without exception, is all on currently ag zoned type land. There's also residential that is on industrial and commercial zoned land as well, because the idea was, going back to the non-conforming use, at some point in time, that crossroad, in order to incentivize some type of small service for that community, maybe a gas station, maybe a convenience store, maybe a small restaurant, sometime in the future would be wanted, needed, or someone would want to invest, that there would be those opportunities. But when we did our investigation on the ground and doing research at our, using our mapping data, we have found that most of them are still residents. And there's residents zoned currently IR and business general, business neighborhood retail. So they're just, it's a very unique situation with the rural villages, and we did not address this in the plan purposefully because still hoping that maybe that would occur sometime in the future. So we do have a lot of that proliferating in the rural villages. So that may be an area too where, as it stands, that residential should be grandfathered into those areas, so that way.
And that's how we have it written.
Yeah.
That's what came out of the planning commission.
We've got 36 of them. I think 35 and a half were in my district.
Yes,
So,
correct.
and they're all challenging because there are businesses that used to be there that aren't any longer, that I think folks, if they had the ability, would want to reopen if they could, because
Right.
some of them are thriving more than others. I always get confused by this state priority funding area and what exactly that means when it comes to, because I heard a little bit about that when we were going through
Right.
that school thing.
So rural villages have a unique designation for state funding. So I guess if you were to need like a small community school or some type of state funding mechanism to help assist with any redevelopment in the rural village, you could participate in some of those funding type projects. You could pull from the toolbox out of Revitalization Maryland and things like that with that designation.
But yet it's so hidden in the toolbox that you can't find it.
And without water and sewer too makes it challenging as well in those areas.
I think that was one of the main reasons that those areas were designated originally when the
Right.
plan was done, because the potential or possibility that they may need water or sewer
Well, and I
services
get
in the
that,
future.
which is sort of why I asked the question last week when we were talking about the water and sewer plan, because, the ability to be able to expand if they're already there, of course, we've only got 2 of them, and Bark Hill is really not rural village, so to speak, but the valley is. But the ability to be able to expand on that if we can, so that we can, I just don't want to limit the rural villages from being able to expand. You know, suppose there's somebody that wants to open up a brewery in Pleasant Valley. Like, for instance, in the old firehouse.
Well, Pleasant Valley
Right
has
now-
water and sewer, which is
well, I
lovely, so
understand
they
that,
could
but
actually become
maybe
a
that's a bad
full-fledged
example, but-
priority funding area.
And I guess when you say expand, Commissioner, though, I think we want to make sure the definitions are right here, where those footprints are set for the
Yes.
PFA, for the prior funding area, so that is set. So inside that area, yes, you could do multiple things, but those areas are not designated, I don't believe, and please correct me,
Right,
Linda and
you're
Mary.
correct.
They're not set to be grown upon, another annexed like out into the other.
Okay.
So the footprint is set for those areas, that those prior funding areas are set. And so you could do things inside them, say you had water and sewer, but growing them larger is probably not an option, certainly from the state's perspective and funding wise.
And that's, and going back to that, what Tom said is correct for the rural villages. With water and sewer, that does give the ability, if we wanted to go and petition the state to make that a full-fledged PFA, that is something that can be done because it does have water and sewer.
Do any of the 35 areas have water and sewer currently?
Well, Pleasant Valley is the only one.
Okay, so 34 out of 35 do not.
Correct.
36.
36. Bark Hill has,
Well, it says they're 35 here,
Oh,
so somebody.
it should be 36.
Okay, so 35 out of 36 do not. Are there plans of putting water and sewer in any of those 35
No.
out of 36? So this really is a kind of a false promise, you know, saying that it's, you know, priority for state funding. I mean, it's nice to say, but the reality is,
Well, no, I mean,
Well-
they're,
and that's kind of where I'm going is, unless Pleasant Valley.
Well, but my point was, I don't want to limit them. If there's someone that sees the opportunity to do something in Lineburgh or Harney or Frizzleburg, I mean, the list goes on, I could, roll with a bunch of them. I don't want our language, I don't want this to be a challenge for those that would wish to do something there.
no, and they could, we could apply for sustainable
understand what I'm
communities for some
trying
of
to
those
say?
Oh, I
areas.
absolutely
Okay.
understand. Yeah, and I think
They're
most,
communities.
Yeah.
They
Well-
need to
well-
be able to provide services they think they need.
I mean, I think there's two items here. One is the fact that most of these rural villages, these businesses aren't going to be able to get very large or expand, be very much because of the lack of land for septic and the lack of water. So
Understood.
that's kind of like a restriction that exists now. But having said that, if they do have water sewer problems in the future, and we have had in the past areas that have been shown to have some issues, the problem is it was never a follow through in implementing them because they couldn't get the community support or,
Right.
for lack of a better term, the political support to move ahead and actually put water and sewer in there. But if that does happen, then the ability to actually come to fruition with some of those maybe ideas that people have to develop in there could happen. So I don't think you want to restrict it at this point in time, because if you do, then I'd say then take the water and sewer issue maybe out of the picture, because
Right.
I think you want to keep them there because those areas will be challenged, I think, in the future
Yes.
from a water and
Yeah.
sewer perspective. As regulations increase, as things happen, the opportunity to have to utilize that PFA designation could be
You
very
don't wanna-
real in those areas.
That's my only
Right.
point. I don't want to limit them.
No, and you don't ever want to get rid of the designation, especially too, there's a lot of bridges, and that helps too with different funding for our county roads. Being in a priority funding area gives us some additional tools. We could apply for sustainable communities for some of these. So there's a lot that can be done.
Okay. Yeah, that's all. Just don't want to limit these folks if that,
Right,
they
but
have
I-
the opportunity to do that.
Yeah,
When
but
I
I-
get out of this job, I might very well want to open up a brewery, or I might need to.
Probably your second
Yeah.
is more valid than the first. But I do think, if you look at these rural villages, and I can, from personal experience, I think, Commissioner, you also, they are, almost all the businesses there are associated with residential, development, whether it's directly connected, whether it goes over top. I mean, they are that is I think, the original mixed-use type of
Yeah.
concept came from these rural villages. If you've ridden into any of them, you've seen how there's a mix, the garage, the store, the house, everything's all connected together there. So, I think
Okay.
the ability to be able to develop that and keep the residences and all, I think it's a great idea to say in these rural village areas, that still should be an option.
Yes, and
That's-
we
that's
didn't want
fine.
to change that.
Yep, that's my only point. Let's not make it hard.
Thank you, that was well
Yep, yep.
articulated, Tom, I appreciate that. So are there any additional questions, comments on the FIO verification and other non-conforming issues? And we will then do the research on ways to sunset perhaps non-conforming uses and see how, because that is the idea of all of these plans. You are correct in saying, you know what, the idea is we want to move to something else, and you can't do that if you keep extending to try to have your plans and your zoning come to fruition. And so then the next was working on the definitions of heavy manufacturing and production and light manufacturing and production. So if you want to take a moment just to read both of those over and see if that helps describe, instead of that circular definition that we had
Right.
previously, to be more clear.
And I can also tell you that the list of specific uses were uses that currently are in the code under IR and under IG. So those examples give the zoning administrator more guidance on how he would interpret this. That's hopefully a helpful thing, but it is definitely not a limited, it's including but not limited to. And then the last line was added about does not include other manufacturing uses specifically listed in the table of uses, meaning if something was pulled out that somebody would think is also heavy manufacturing, if it's specifically listed, that's the way it's going to be regulated. You can't say in that case that you're a heavy manufacturing. So I pulled these from a number of different codes, and hopefully it's the right combination this time.
So, expand on the definition of incidental real quick. Mary or whoever. And as it pertains to storage and distribution, or storage, sales and distribution, maybe I'm getting confused, but.
I
if
think
you've got a-
I'm sorry.
Well, if you've got a light manufacturing company and you're manufacturing widgets, you ever done a widget?
Depends how big it is.
Okay, anyway, does incidental mean that I perhaps could sell them occasionally? I'm hung up on what incidental means.
Typically, it means secondary to the principal use. Jay could probably give a better explanation of how he interprets it though.
Basically, say if you're manufacturing widgets, you have a small sales office out in front.
Right.
That would be incidental to the manufacturing process. It's not the major use of the property. It's something that is normal.
Give off the business.
In the normal day of business, is the way they operate, and that's not.
Okay, you almost make it sound as if it's a second nature thing where it could be primary for me. That could be, I might not be able to make the widgets if I can't sell them from there. You know,
Well,
that's
the area you'd be selling them from would not be larger than what the area you're manufacturing from. So
Okay.
It's definitely not the principal purpose of manufacturing. Manufacturing, that's what you're doing. But you do have
Okay.
a small sales office there. Most of your widgets you ship to other sellers, but you do keep some on site to, you know, as a
Okay.
showcase, as a sell to.
So at what point does it not, at what point does it become not incidental? Maybe that's my question. At what point do you get to the area of, okay, well, now I'm really selling. Now do I have to go through rezoning because I'm not really incidental anymore?
That could be a possibility.
And that
If you had- if you had a
judgment is up to who?
Huh?
You or me as the business owner?
It would be up to me.
Probably, I might have a
I would
problem
have
with
to,
that.
understand, let's say if you were
Welcome to zoning.
manufacturing widgets. If you were manufacturing widgets and you had originally 75% of your plant was in the manufacturing process.
Right.
Okay, and you had a small sales office, and sales really took off. And it eventually got to be over 50% of the floor space of the building you're using.
Okay, I'd
Guess
have to
what?
come back and then,
That's become the principal use of the property. You're selling. You're not-
Okay,
you're
okay.
not manufacturing there. principal use has
Yeah.
become selling.
Okay.
Then that would be a change, you would have to look at that.
I guess I'm just hung up on the word incidental because it almost makes it sounds like it's an afterthought to the product that you're manufacturing. But yet it could be the primary reason as to why you are manufacturing. You know where I'm going here? So that's, I just don't want to get hung up on the language and have somebody come back and challenge that and say, well, you know, what does incidental mean?
Is
What?
incidental the same thing as accessory?
Yeah, basically, yes. I mean, it's, if you have a, I'm gonna use local business, Huffman's, they manufacture ice cream there, they also sell it. Selling it is incidental to manufacturing it there.
Yeah, but that, isn't that a little different? Because that's the primary, that's the
That's the
primary.
product they're making is ice cream, and that's what they're selling.
Okay.
But like you say, they also sell their ice cream to other.
Okay, I just don't wanna have a manufacturer get hung up on what incidental means.
Understood. I think part of, you have to also not look at, yeah, the use. You have to focus on the use. So in the light manufacturing and production, that is your primary overriding use, all right? If you wanna do.
That's your manufacturing.
That's your manufacturing something. You're creating something, all right? And in this case, you're creating it from raw material, not from raw materials, you're getting processed materials and all and creating it, okay? All right, if you want to then start using, sales, that's a different use that the light manufacturing production technically probably should not allow. But what we're saying is you can do some small amount of that selling there, as long as it doesn't become the primary use. Because then if it becomes the primary use, then you've gone into the retail sales. All right, and retail sales are not allowed in light manufacturing and production as the overarching use. So again, it's a juggling act, Commissioner, and it happens on a daily basis
Just use
sometimes.
Another business type thing that, the Utz plant up in Hanover,
Okay.
they manufacture potato chips here, that's what they do, that's the principal use of that. But they also have a small store on site, it's incidental to the manufacturing, because 90% of the chips that they make there are going someplace else to be sold.
Okay.
No, and that's the example I was thinking of, exactly that, an outlet store. like
It's basically, on-site outlet store for the
Okay.
manufacturer.
Okay.
It's not your principal use there. Your principal product is going to a whole bunch of different people, but you're also selling it on site.
All right, I just didn't want to get hung, I didn't want
Right, no, I
somebody to get hung up on the word incidental.
But if they grew, say to a point their sales went up, that would be a non-conforming use then to go back to a retail store, right?
There'd be a zoning
They'd have to
violation,
apply for it.
actually. That'd be
I
a
mean,
zoning
if it became the
violation.
principal use.
So they would have to actually move, shut down and move
But
if
it
we
wouldn't
didn't
be
give
based on
non-conforming
volume,
use
it
or
would be
something
based on
like that.
size, wouldn't it?
You don't give non-conforming uses, so that's something that occurs by operation of the code. A non-conforming use is created when there is a zoning change. So,
Okay.
so it's not like a spot rezoning that the Board of County Commissioners can award, so to speak, or agree to because of a change or mistake. A non-conforming use occurs sort of on its own as a result of like this rezoning effort. So, but let's say they decided all their manufacturing went to China and now they were just retail sales, they would technically be in violation of zoning code, and then we'd have to take
So
it from
to
there.
change their zoning, then they'd have to go back and.
Well, it depends on what the situation is. They might have to ultimately move to a retail proper location,
So we
proper
could put
location.
them out of business. ways.
They could choose to move.
Or they could choose to reduce the amount of sales, keep it, and maybe make a sales off somewhere else and still have a small amount, so they might have to reduce the amount of sales over there, but you still stay there and keep manufacturing, I guess.
But Tom and Jay, I think one thing to clarify, it's based on size or based on volume? We can't say the volume of their sales. I mean, they could be doing more sales. It's really based on the space that they've associated with that transaction. So that becomes larger than the primary manufacturing. Then that would be the trigger. It wouldn't be that now they went from 500,000 to $1 million in sales. We don't have that
We don't care about
knowledge.
that.
Okay,
Right.
I was just challenged by that word.
Like Cooper is a manufacturer,
Right.
forgive me for correcting, I guess. Cooper is a manufacturer, that is what they do, but as part of manufacturing, they have their sales office, they have their research and development,
But I can't go there paid by breaks.
sounded that particular.
I got rid of my, I sold my train last year, and she said, cash go.
If they had a shelf out front or something, they
Yeah,
didn't want
that's
to.
right, right. I see where you're going. I just, yeah, I just got hung up on the word incidental because I can see,
Right.
I can see a good land use attorney.
Too bad there's none of those.
There's no good use.
Oh, so, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt. So,
What's next?
Well, maybe Clay can
Okay.
clarify some things, or maybe we should change the verbiage.
As defined in the current zoning code, accessory use states, a use of land or all or part of a building which is customarily incidental and secondary to the principal use of the building and which is located on the same lot with the principal use. So one of the things we look at is maybe assessing incidental, which is accessory, because it's already defined as incidental.
okay, that might make me a little, that might put my mind at ease just a tad, because that incidental part, that's.
Or your
future brewing establishment?
Yes, this is correct.
No, widgets.
Widgets.
No.
So would you change it then also in the,
In both, right, and heavy.
well, but also in this chart?
Well, the chart is just for
I'm gonna
information.
take straws and turn them into widgets.
Where it says noise, vibration, it's a noise, vibration. I understand we're talking about slow papers, shoes, not slow, but.
Noise, we do have a noise ordinance that if you're violating, and it's become a reason, or you're exceeding it, or a constant level,
Okay, but
that would be.
is
a
that
reason.
noxious noise? How is that defined? That's what I'm asking.
What comes out of this board?
Well, that's a good question.
I mean,
Things there, because I can see, like, smoke or vapor, yeah, I can understand noxious for that. But for noise and vibration, I
I
don't.
don't think that's the proper adjective.
No, I don't either.
I think you may want to tweak that a little bit. You may want to tweak it for a number of reasons. Number one, who, as Dennis says, who identifies what noxious means? Number two, we do have a noise ordinance, but I don't know what we do with it. It's no mystery. Because it's, first of all, it's challenging to regulate it, check it, and everything else. So, we're challenged enough with inspections, I get that, but the noise part of it is way over here.
The only thing is, for sure, I would say that if you don't have that in here and you keep your noise ordinance, then you're potentially allowing things to happen that's in a violation of your noise ordinance, so. If it is a business that emits noise, beyond the decibel levels that are allowed in your ordinance, you certainly don't want to promote it or allow it through your.
I'm just saying it should be written differently. The way it's written, it doesn't.
Jay, isn't that if it's detectable from adjacent property?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
If your car, you can detect vibration in the glass or something. Oh,
Truck wouldn't go activate vibration.
it could very well be. You had enough of it, they can cause it. I mean, if you have a piece of manufacturing equipment that's constantly banging on something, setting up a vibration that could be felt by the neighbor, that would be an issue.
There are manufacturing uses that I've spoken with in the past that are in multi-tenant building. And one tenant said, this guy is creating
criteria that the Board of Zoning Appeals and actually Jay, as zoning administrator, through his hearing process, that is one of the criteria or guidelines or standards that are supposed to be looked at in the process, in the appeal process.
They're specifically listed.
Odors, dust, gas, fume, vibration, noise, those are, so they are listed somewhere else in the code, kind of standard to use. I'm not sure how you find all those, but they are listed there. That's part of the criteria.
And they sort of separate here the heavy manufacturing, the idea that heavy manufacturers have higher impacts on their immediate surroundings than light manufacturers, right? That's sort of the reason they're listed here in light manufacturing, because they're generally supposed to not emit these things to the same extent that a heavy manufacturer would. So it's a distinguishing factor.
Improvements to the definitions?
You asking for them?
No, I'm asking, have there been improvements to the definitions? And if they're not, is there more work that needed?
Yeah, I
Is there
think
more work needed?
that's good. I mean,
That's circular.
Okay, that's, there you
That was
go.
our number one goal.
Yes. So we'll change incidental to accessory and get rid of at least noxious and maybe work on that.
Yes,
second
we'll
one.
work on that.
And other than that, it sound good?
Yeah.
Good. Well done, guys.
All right, awesome. So then, I think the next thing to tackle, because we had gotten through all the accessory uses and all of the pages up to page 41. I'm sorry, yeah, artisan, I'm sorry, Mary.
There were questions last time about artisan manufacturing and the problems that it would cause if something went over 3 employees. So we went back and we tried to convert the number of employees to square footage, which was a bit of a challenge. But what we came up with as a proposal is, instead of saying that it would be the owner of the artisan himself plus possibly 3 employees, is we came up with 3,500. And I'll tell you how we did it. Other codes typically don't have any square footage or any employees. They leave it up to the zoning administrator or who's ever interpreting the code to decide if something is light manufacturing or artisan manufacturing. And we decided, and especially Jay, that that would not be, it would just be too difficult to tell somebody that they were not artisan, but they were light. So we need some sort of standard. We found one small town in Montana that uses 3,500. There's really other places that have it, and it is a popular use now, don't have any square footage. So we started talking about 3,500. And then we also looked at the typical square footage for an industrial employee is 527. So for the 3 employees and the artisan himself, that's a little over 2,000 square feet. With some incidental or accessory retail sales, we thought 3,500 sounded like a reasonable thing to propose to you. And we looked at other uses that are 3,500 square feet. We have a list of them, and it seemed reasonable that that would be something you'd see in the commercial, the C2. We pretty much envision this in the C2 district, and that's the whole purpose for creating this use, is that it's not an industrial use per se. It's more belongs in the commercial districts. So that was our starting point for discussion today.
I like how you came up with it.
A little over half an acre.
Yeah.
And what, 6/10 of an acre or something. You could, that's pretty good size if you're thinking about these smaller businesses and all, and you're thinking about maybe in the
Jewelry
rural
or-
villages
yeah.
or places like that where they might be. That's a pretty good sized lot. You know, just to have the business on now, they could still, you know, there could be a residence, there could be other things on the property in addition to that also.
Would the building be that big? No more, like their footprint, or would the lot be that big? The building?
The building.
The building.
Yeah,
That's- yeah,
activity,
I just
right,
wanted
that's
to
what I'm
make sure.
saying,
That was
though.
fine.
The
You're allowed
pottery shop
that
or
6/10 of an acre for
jewelry
that
maker.
use, then there could be other things, you know, associated with it, so.
And this isn't one where we'd be creating problems for existing people, because we're creating this as a new use. So it's not that we have other businesses to go to that are doing this legally that we're worried about displacing. But we did agree that the using employees was a problem, because it doesn't allow somebody to vary their business.
So if you all agree to that, we will change the definition on page 1 to reflect then the square footage recommendation of 3,500.
Okay.
So the language would say what exactly then?
Well, first of all, we get rid of the typo. It's actually not artesian,
It's
it's artisan.
Right.
Got biased. With no more than occupying no more than 3,500 square feet or something.
You could say up to.
Up to.
Up to 3,500 square feet. I would say that.
Okay.
Make it a little more smooth.
So that would just be a bullet underneath of artisan?
It's part of that sentence.
Instead of referencing the 3 employees on page 1.
Yeah, so instead of.
Oh, page 1 of the marked up.
No, I've got.
You should have
Yeah.
that. It says proposed text amendment, it's the one that says underlining, then strike out.
We have that? Oh,
You
yeah,
should.
yeah, okay.
Yep.
Yep, sorry, I was on the wrong page. Okay, I see,
Yes,
got
that's
it,
correct.
okay.
So instead of with no more than 3 employees, it would say
was-
occupying up to 3,500 square
Correct.
feet.
Okay.
Is there anything else we wanted to?
How big are you saying 3,500 square feet is?
I think it's like 1.6.
43,560 is an acre, yeah.
Oh,
No, it's
I'm
less
sorry.
than-
We're talking about square
That's-
footage of
Yeah,
the
square
building.
footage,
It's
right.
less than a tenth of an acre.
Yeah, 3,500.
3,500
You're saying
square acres,
35,000.
43,000
Right.
square feet.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
3,500. Because when you said that, I taught remedial math, and I'm thinking,
You do this too much.
Yes, sorry, 10th of an acre.
so it is 3,500 that we're looking at,
Yes.
but
Yes.
not
Right.
your acreage.
Right.
I apologize.
Okay.
Right, not acres.
Okay, 'cause
Square
I'm
feet.
thinking, does this make sense?
Like a Subway.
Yeah,
Store,
yeah.
restaurant.
Yeah,
It'll be a
Look,
little
that
bigger
is-
than
yeah.
Subway. Yeah.
Not the one going underground.
No. No.
Gotcha.
Back to Kenora Break
We don't talk
again.
about that. Gotcha, okay.
Tom, Paige, were there any other outstanding issues that we felt we needed to address? I think that was it. Yeah, for our list.
From the last time?
Yeah.
I want to talk, I think we all bring up the
Oh,
golf course.
the golf courses,
I
okay.
think we had a discussion about golf courses and the definition, and maybe we could turn to that definition here. if we wanted
It
to.
was a little confusing.
Which page? Right here, on page 2. Flip the page over from where we just were. And the last time I think we had a discussion, we got talking about restaurants and banquets and weddings and things associated with that, and I think there was a little bit of discussion about them being accessory uses and all, and actually, right now, as the code is currently, they are not, okay? They are not. They
Not
are separate-
accessory
Those are
uses.
separate
Accessory.
uses, so they have to be dealt with separately. So, in this definition here, we feel that if the board, the direction the board would like to take is that you think they should be part of the golf course as a whole, or allowed in the golf course setting, that we ought to actually say that in the golf course, and we ought to add something in the code that says that those types of uses, whether, restaurants and wedding facilities or banquets, are part of the golf course overall definition and what you would want to see in a golf course setting. Because right now, they are not really. And really, technically speaking, the only way, again, you technically, and correct me, Clay, if I'm wrong, you can have the actual banquets and things like that, really, you need the country in.
Country.
Yeah.
So, we're gonna correct, we're in the process of correcting.
I know,
points,
we're making,
Howard.
we're working.
So,
Currently, the way
you know,
it is.
that,
I
I
know,
wanna
but
make sure it was
I'm-
clear, because I think there was,
I'm
when we
country
walked away
and
from
up
here the
here.
last time, that may not have been as clear.
Well, then, let's call them what they are, which is, I think, what I brought up the last time. I don't know of one golf course that doesn't allow some sort of banquet or whatever.
Yeah, it's part of the business plan.
Yeah. So, and that's a valid point. It's part of their business plan. It should be in here. They shouldn't have to
That's fine.
get a non-conforming use to do that, because that's what they do. And a lot of these golf courses as well have a tournament, and then they'll have a banquet after the tournament.
Maybe they'll buy
And
your
you're-
beer.
And, exactly. So,
Well, I'm not talking about the clubhouse now. I'm
Right.
talking about if you have
Yeah, but that's-
special facilities to host.
Well, if
to
we're not
host
talking
weddings
about
and
the
things like
clubhouse-
that aren't.
that's part of the golf course.
I'm not disputing that, Commissioner. Then let's make sure it's clear in here in the definition. It says that those types of activities are included in the definition of the golf course.
Why are you rolling your eyes at me, Clay?
I guess my question is, if we have a golf tournament, if there's a golf tournament, and after the golf tournament, the golfers get together and they have a banquet there too, are we talking about that? Or are we talking about a separate issue, which is unrelated to the golf course, which is renting out that banquet hall to someone else
Wedding.
unrelated to the golf course and having a wedding there?
Both.
Okay.
It should allow for both, I mean.
Yeah.
Shallon's
Understood.
an
Right.
example. you know?
Understood, but I think what we're trying to say is, what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about the golfers, or are we talking about stepping it out separately?
Yes.
Because for the golfers, that is a use that is,
Accessory to the golf
that is
course.
currently accessory and incidental to the golf tournament.
Agreed, but it's one and the same, really, I think.
But, well,
It's-
You
I'm
just wanna make sure you
utilizing-
get the language
Well, I
right.
just wanna make sure
We're
that
trying-
we don't get these
Then
guys messed up
we-
with language
We want
in
the
here.
if that's what you want, then that language needs to be saying that.
Then-
I think you make a very good point, Eric. It's part of the business plan in most of these. A lot of these folks rely on that in order to maintain the golf course.
Then let's include,
Especially
we
this
would
year.
recommend, I
Yeah.
think, that you include that in the definition, so there's no dispute about that. There's no, it's very
Call it what it
clear
is.
that the golf
Wouldn't that
course
make
is
your job a lot
allowed.
easier?
Banquet
Much
way, and they also, and again, now let me go back to the restaurant part of it now. You know, if you're providing a small area for the golfers to use, you know, to get something, sandwiches on when we're done, that's one thing. But if you're going to allow full-fledged restaurants that are open to the public, and the public can come in, that may be a little different. So, again, I think we just need to make sure we're clear. We wanted to make sure we're clear, because I don't think we were when we walked away from here the last time. Let's clean it up and let's do it the way you want it. And if you want
Right.
that, let's put it in definition, and then there's no question in the future as to what can and can't happen.
Yeah,
But the important thing too is that a golf course is not permitted in the commercial zones. This was put in the definitions to differentiate it from another use, but it is in the ag and the conservation district. So once you change that definition,
Right.
you're
Change it.
changing what's allowed before we even get to the ag and the conservation.
Right.
So-
What's that, the cart before the horse thing, Mary? Is that what you're saying?
Little bit.
It's the cart with the horse, which end you're looking at.
I just wanted to not leave
That's
here
a good-
unclear again.
Well, I mean, the key is that the definitions are consistent regardless. I mean,
That's what I'm saying, it
Yeah,
would definitely
so-
apply to it, but just
Right.
so we would know that we're actually, even though we think we're just discussing commercial and industrial
Right.
today, that would actually make a change to something in the industrial
understood,
Well-
but
conservation.
again, it's consistency with the definitions.
Yeah,
And,
you gotta call it what it is.
exactly.
I don't
So,
care where it is. Gotta call it what it is.
It's fine.
so the concern possibly is that because the golf courses are only allowed in the conservation and the ag zone, by allowing this as of right, not by conditional use or not as an accessory use, but as of right, you're actually potentially intensifying the use on that property. So you're making what is now a golf course that's fairly pastoral into allowing it to become a more commercial operation. So you're gonna be out in the middle of nowhere in our ag zone, and, that means traffic and noise and
And
other
citing septic
things.
and,
Citing, yeah, just,
cooking and wells.
right.
One other thing about the golf course, and Tom had said like with the restaurant, there's a difference between a restaurant and a banquet hall. I mean, there's a big difference. A banquet hall is just something that hosts an
Private
activity.
party, yeah.
And food is usually prepared off-site, or a caterer comes in, whereas a restaurant, if you're allowing that as in the golf course also, then you're allowing the general public to come in here whenever they're open to eat. Whereas with a banquet hall, it's gonna be generally those events that are.
That's a good
they're
point.
hosted.
And if
So
I
if
might,
you really wanna-
if I might, on the golf course, again, this is one way or the other, is that on the golf course, as soon as the daylight is over with, the tournament is typically over with and the golfers leave. If this were opened up to a banquet hall, then the Saturday night weddings would be might end up being the prevalent situation that occurs, which is not what maybe the intent was initially.
So why don't we look at creating two definitions. One was a golf course, and then a second, golf course and a golf course and some. So we're, and therefore, getting back to the agricultural areas where we were just allowed in one definition of a golf course, but in other areas we could allow the golf course and, I don't want to say golf course and resort, but, I mean, because there are golf courses that just have facilities for the golfers, then there's golf courses, and there are golf courses and resorts that allow for banquets and weddings and.
We do currently have something in the definition that would cover something like that, and that is a country club.
It could be.
It's, our definition is a private club which offers recreational facilities such as swimming, golf, or tennis to its members and guests, and may provide dining facilities or host catered events.
I just don't think it has
Where's
to be
that?
private.
Okay.
Where's that allowed?
If I remember correctly, let
Ag
me
and
check. I
conservation.
think it's in the ag.
And they do have nighttime golf.
I mean, well, it might, Jay, I might not go to a golf course to eat specifically if I'm a member of the public, but is there anything wrong with that?
I mean,
Like, I mean, I felt like we were just saying like, okay, if you're at a tournament, you're at a tournament, but it's not open to the general public. But if I wanted to go to Chaladon, because I'm dropping by and they have a great club sandwich or whatever, you know.
Right.
I don't even know how you could police that.
We don't want to police the page, we want to make sure we approve it, and we
Well,
don't
that's
have
what
to.
they have to.
I mean, I guess what we're saying is.
I think it's more of a
We-
question.
And we've thrown
It's
around a lot of
permitted
things
intensity
here,
of
and
use.
maybe everything isn't as it appears in the county.
You can be open to the
We want to
general
make it appear as it should
But then it gets
to you
too
all. So if
intense,
your
right?
vision is that these facilities should be allowed to do those multiple uses, then let's make it clear in the definitions that they can happen. The problem we run into sometimes, commissioners, in zoning is people use definitions both for good and for evil. Not evil, bad. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting everybody in this case. So those who want to do things and those who think that they can use those things to prevent things from happening or to interfere with people's businesses. So the clear thing is, if we want to have these things here, we all agree, then let's make it very clear in definitions they do, and then
Well, if you already have the country club definition, which has everything in that we're talking about, and it's allowed in ag as well, why do we have to change golf course?
I think the private too.
the
is,
private,
there.
that's the issue that I have, that says private, and
But then let's just tweak the country club definition, because if you want to have the country club instead of a golf course,
actually,
that's up to you.
in that definition, it doesn't strictly say private for country club. It says public or private, non-commercial.
Ah, if you said
So
private.
we already have the two definitions.
Public or private, non-commercial?
That's what it says.
see,
The
that's-
non-commercial
recreational
says.
Does it?
The complete
Scratch out non-commercial.
No, it doesn't.
Because that doesn't make any sense. We
And
would do that,
that's
but
the
don't make
use
it money.
that it's listed with, recreation areas and
Right.
centers, public or non-commercial, including country clubs, swimming pools, golf courses, and summer camps. That's a principal use allowed in the ag.
And what's the
Now, the country
definition
club,
again?
it did say,
Just private.
a private club which offers recreational facilities such as swimming, golf, or tennis to its members and guests, and may provide dining facilities or host catered events.
So I think the board sounds like they'd want to get rid of the word private, because the private in the because the word private is in the definition of country club. Is that, am I getting that sense correctly?
Yes.
We don't need the word private in that definition.
And then would you include it in this definition?
You have
Whole
two
thing?
separate
There are
things.
two
Because you can
definitions.
have the country club.
Or just a golf course.
Which has a golf course attached to it, or you can have just the golf course with the clubhouse,
So
just for the
your
golfers.
suggestion is to keep them separate?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then whichever one you apply for is the one that you,
Okay.
that you get.
All right, take out the private from the country club.
Yeah. Yeah,
And then-
that-
That
that-
way it might
Because a
get in.
restaurant though, because that would be the public
Pardon?
entity, is
That
that,
way it
is
might
that,
get
in-
in.
is that assumed, is
Now,
that inferred?
we don't have
Kind of
a,
assumed.
Okay,
I
yep,
mean,
right.
kind of like just pulling this right all the way through, we don't have a resort definition. Because I'm thinking, you know, the Turf Valley type location, where it is now everything that was shared within Country Club, but it also has a hotel associated with it. And it's one complex. And just going back to what the other commissioners were sharing is, somebody comes together with a business plan, they're not gonna piecemeal, I want this, and then, oh, now I also want this, and you have to go through two separate processes. They want, here is the business plan. So if we, I believe if we're going down this road with these definitions, and we're separating definitions, golf course, this is what it is associated with a facility supporting the golfers, country club, and then the next one would be resort.
Full resort.
Yeah, a full resort. And we should have a definition that expands the country club into country, that plus.
But would we allow that in commercial industrial employment campus? The reason I say that is because of the water and sewer issue. To have a hotel, you would need water and sewer. We don't have any ag or conservation zone land on water and sewer, so we would almost have to allow that then into the commercial industrial employment campus or one of the residential categories. Because we can't expand the water and sewer into the ag or conservation. MDE actually won't even allow that, to amend
Yeah.
our water and sewer plan to be ag or conservation for the priority.
Are these definitions that we're going over, just to, are these, the definitions you found, or the concept team found a need to change because of the changes made to the commercial industrial?
Exactly, and then
So
we
they're
plan on doing
obviously
it again
not
for
all-
residential, then we plan on doing it again for ag as it
Right.
applies. But this one unfortunately was
A little bit of both.
creeping
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
ag and conservation.
But the definition should be regardless of the, industrial, commercial, residential. They should be definitions.
Oh, they will ultimately be,
Yeah.
but I think, and the point is that they specifically, the concept team specifically pulled out those definitions that clearly conflicted with the industrial commercial zoning as they did the verbiage for that and the use tables. Is that
Right.
right?
Yes.
So you didn't pull out the definition of R40 because that's gonna be when you decide, when you work on the residential,
Yeah.
just for example.
But we just have to be aware that what if somebody wants to come here and build a resort? And where,
Yeah.
how is that defined and where would that be allowed? Now, I'm not saying I'm promoting
Right.
that, I'm just saying that that's kind of the next.
No, absolutely, and I guess that's what I was saying a little bit, that if we wanna make that a use that would be allowed, resort, and add it to this use table, it would be appropriate to say in the commercial industrial employment campus now, because you wouldn't cross it into the ag or conservation.
Because of the water sewer
Because we don't have
problem.
water and sewer, and you wouldn't extend water and sewer to ag or conservation. So you'd have to consider where in the commercial industrial employment campus would you allow that, and it could, employment campus may be an area where a resort, we do allow, hotel facilities with conference centers already in
Employment campus.
So maybe that's already covered when,
Could it be a mixed use where golf courses are in the ag, or conservation district with the resort primarily in a employment campus?
Only if the land happened to adjoin one another.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I assume you wouldn't want those,
right.
them separated on different parts of the county.
And we do have in the conference center definition that the hotel
Yeah, right.
is a piece of that,
Right,
but the golf course
It's not.
is not.
right, and I think we have a banquet and stuff like that, which is.
Right,
part
we have
of
them separate,
the-
but not the
Cafeterias,
ones
dining
Right.
rooms.
But again, I'm just kind of filling out the rest of these definitions. I mean, we're going down golf course, went down country club. The next step would be the resort. And, I mean, as far as defining.
Could we add resort to conference center?
We have-
Would that, I mean, just the word resort?
Conference center and
Resort.
But then
To-
we would have
But
to
we have
add,
to-
We have to
Including
define
golf
what
course.
is.
We need to define it, I think.
Yeah.
and then where's that allowed? Where are conference centers allowed?
Well, we do allow, we do have a definition for retreat or conference center already.
Is golf course and tennis club and.
It says a
swimming pool?
facility used for professional, educational, or religious conclaves, meetings, conferences, or seminars. and which may provide meals, housing, and recreation for participants during the period of the retreat or program only. Such centers may not be utilized by the general public for meals or overnight accommodations.
Conference is pretty
Yeah,
So a
it's-
conference
yeah.
center
It's
is
allowed in
basically that,
employment
it's for those people there. It's
And
not a
C3.
hotel
And C2
with a
right.
conference center where people are coming to, if I wanted to spend a night at the hotel, I can't do that.
Again, what I'm thinking is the Turf Valley model. And Turf Valley, has a lot of opportunities for people going there that are not, they don't belong to Turf Valley. They can go there, they can stay there, they can play golf, they can get a massage, they can do all those things. We should, as we're defining these things, and we've already gone down the road with golf course and country club, the next step would be a Turf Valley type of model. Not saying that I'm reaching out to Mangione for Turf Valley, but his name's in front of me, and that is a model. That is a business model.
Do you want to read the definition for conference center?
Sure, so then conference center on page 2 of the strikeout says a facility for conducting meetings, discussion, and conferences. A conference center may include a meeting room, auditorium, cafeteria, dining rooms, and supporting services designed to accommodate planned meetings and may be accessory to a hotel or motel. And then we allow it as conditional in the C2, permitted in the C3 and employment campus, and then as part of an industrial park in the I1 and the I2. So that has everything but the
Hotel.
golf course component
Resort.
to,
Right.
right, the resort component to it.
So
And the
that's why I
hotel
was
would be
saying, do you
considered
think
separate.
just adding
So-
resort to that conference center definition would cover it? I don't.
You would have to allow the definitions of
All the.
country
Yep.
club into that.
Okay.
Either
And it
way,
also
a
doesn't
separate
include the
definition.
hotel. It's accessory
To
to
the
the hotel,
hotel.
so it is considered separate the way we have it written.
Again, I'm just looking at if somebody's coming here, there's a business plan. We should be able to accommodate them in this type of discussion. Right now, I don't think we can.
Mary,
Yes.
maybe I misunderstood, but a conference center does not have to be, as it's written now, does not have to be accessory to a hotel. It may be.
It may be.
It can
Right.
stand alone. or
No,
it
that
can-
wasn't, I
Oh.
meant that it doesn't include a hotel. If it was being suggested that it would be one comprehensive use, that would be the conference center, the hotel, and the golf course. We have that as 3 separate uses.
Right, as opposed to just
So
making
if we
resort
want to
definition.
define resort as
Yeah.
A separate.
all those things together.
So we certainly can draft up that
Okay.
definition if you guys all want it.
Yeah,
And
I think that's a good idea, and I think
And
it
then-
should be allowed where the conference center is allowed.
sounds, yeah.
And not on
Draft
ag.
resort as okay.
Thanks.
Now, the mega resort is the next.
Disney's coming.
I hope not.
Dinosaur parks.
Yeah, yes, uh-huh. And then Northern Florida County,
And we're not talking casinos.
Yes, you may be excused.
off of 7.
We may have to expand a little village for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there anything else, Tom, or anyone else in the definitions that were commissioners that needed to be changed that we haven't addressed?
More might come up when we start talking
Yes.
about the use table.
Right.
Yes.
So you want to go to that?
Yes, that starts on page 41. And just to refresh your memory, this is just the use table for C1, C2, C3, I1, I2, and employment campus. We start off with the overall land use category, then the subcategory, and then the description. So the land use category is in the dark blue, the gray is the subcategory, and then the description is in the white. So, for the first is, even though, we're not talking about ag is still allowed, and that's in the dark blue category, so that's the overarching land use category. So ag, again, this is one of the ones that we are having a pass-through use, that ag is allowed in C1, C2, C3, I1, I2, and employment campus.
Also, just to point out, this is just principal uses, not
Yes.
accessory uses or temporary uses, because I think there's been some confusion from some questions we've been asked. So
That's
it's
a good-
simply principal uses. And then we address accessory uses later, and we made no changes suggested to the temporary uses.
So if you want to go, and there's quite a few pages, so if you want to just take a moment and then perhaps if you see something you don't agree with, we can have a discussion. But if we're good with each of the categorical areas, we can just keep moving forward till we find a topic of discussion.
So you want to focus at the moment on the ag category and then the
Yep,
communications,
we're
then
going to go
commercial?
straight down the line here.
Lynn, is this a new chart?
It's from 10/16/18. Which is posted on the website. So if you pull it from there, you should see
I got it.
Yep, you're good.
And if you have any questions about what's new, it's impossible to tell from the table because we got rid of all those lists. And now it's,
Tabular.
you know, so it is very difficult without turning back, but we pretty much know. We do know what's been changed.
So I apologize, since I'm still on golf courses. I see a whole bunch of X's. Where are golf courses allowed currently?
The ag and conservation zones.
Ag and conservation only.
So not anything that you're going to see in these use tables?
Right.
Not in these
And-
use tables?
Country club?
Ag
Ag only.
and conservation.
Okay, okay.
But a conference center is C2
Right.
and 3.
Jag, do you have the code, the existing code?
Can you explain me?
Yeah, yes,
So it's-
I think if we try to look at one section at a time, it'd be easiest. So if we
Yeah.
just look,
Yeah.
rather than all of them, let's
Right.
just look at the agricultural section, which is the first. I mean, it starts unfortunately on the bottom of page 41 and continues to page 40, the very top of page 42. That way we all are talking
Conditional
about the
use
same thing at the same time.
It's more fun bouncing back.
No, we don't do that.
Keep them. What's your, the next one's
So,
the strikeout.
Mary, I'm not expecting an exhaustive list, but maybe as we go through these, it would be helpful for the board to understand some of the major changes. So was there anything major that changed in this section for agriculture? that you can
Yes,
identify?
nothing we could find that was a problem for any current uses, but for feed and grain sales, those are currently conditional in the BG, and we're making them permitted in the C2 and C3. And flour or grain milling was permitted in the I1, and now we're proposing C.
Making it conditional.
Conditional, I'm sorry.
So that's slightly more restrictive,
That's
whereas
slightly
the.
more restrictive, but the feed or grain sales
Is more
is
open.
less restrictive because it will be permitted. Those are the only two changes.
We had a conversation last time about livestock.
Raw versus
Is livestock
assembly.
in this at all? You know, livestock preparation, slaughter?
That's down in
butcher?
food processing.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So any questions, I guess, about
You have
the.
the first section, the ag section.
Dick, I'm gonna refer to you on this question. Making it conditional in I-1 for a flour or grain milling, drying or storage, why wouldn't that just be permitted? I mean, that would be my
When you're
question.
looking at flour or grain milling, what about milling for a small distillery?
Well, I think it's all milling. I think it's just
Milling.
more descriptive. But the reason is because, and that's a good question, we were just chatting about that, it's the raw material as opposed to the assembly of already put together material. So it's still permitted, it's just a conditional use because we were looking at anything taking its raw material and converting it to something else, being a little more intense. And then this way, they would still be allowed to do it, it would just have to go through an additional step.
BZA.
Keep in mind that heavy and light, those definitions.
I
And that's
know.
what we did. We kept having to
Yeah, that's
refer
where
back
Go
I
back
to
and
them.
check.
Yeah,
In fact,
big
we,
jam.
we
Okay.
would have them laying in front of us, and when we looked at some of these, we would read them again and say, okay, where does it fit in here,
Yeah, I'm
And
going
that's-
back and forth. as
Right.
So,
I
So
mean,
if you
Steve's Distillery, he may bring some raw materials in. He
getting-
needs to
I'm getting
mill
big
it
sales
before he
already.
can brew the product and make his final product, which is his primary use.
All he needs is a conditional use.
Yep.
Well, if it's a distillery, we address that later.
we do,
Being
okay.
allowed to mill their own.
Distillery,
Okay.
something whole different.
So I'm good? I'm
So
good, Jay?
in a distillery, they could mill a limited amount and be,
Their own product, I don't know if
Permitted.
they could do that.
You'll need a good
Is that
attorney,
part of the
buddy.
distillery?
Say what the process is for
reaching
this.
for a
For
card?
distilling.
Yeah, no, we don't.
Clark, he said good.
Uh-oh.
My daughter left.
That's, okay, now we're on the right track.
We don't talk about the process of distilling, so I guess if you need, but I would think you wouldn't mill it
See,
yourself.
that'd be
I mean,
part
I
of the
think you would-
process here, even though
Of
it's
distilling.
limited.
Yeah.
How would you
that-
interpret
I'm
that,
not-
Jay?
I'm not trying to make a big deal, but it seems to me it would be permitted in both.
I mean, you're talking about a mill the
Be part
size
of
of that
distillery.
table that would just grind a small
If
amount
it's for yourself.
to put through that's being
For
used
yourself.
in
Well,
the
we're
process.
not necessarily,
You're
Commissioner,
not allowed-
you're not talking about, that's an accessory use, which could
That
be
would be-
different. These are not, these are dealing only with
But this
principal.
is part of the zoning though, I mean, if
Well,
this is
in
distillery,
this
that's
case,
what.
if
But
you
the
were,
use table is only dealing with principal uses.
if the principal use was a
Right.
distillery, then that
Then
little bit
it-
of milling would be allowed as an accessory use to that distillery,
As an accessory.
instead of just a huge,
Okay.
flower.
primary.
We'll get to accessory uses, these are just principal uses, so that
Yeah,
distillery
right.
with a milling operation on the side, we'll get to, keep
Okay.
that thought,
Now,
because,
do they all have to be named out in here? I mean, we have a list of what they're going to be later, or?
who, what do you
Like-
mean by they?
A milling in a distillery is an accessory use, is that gonna be spelled out, or does it have some latitude here, what is an accessory? Because you're never gonna spell all
No.
these things
Yeah, we
out.
do spell some of
That's
the
something
things
that
out
would
later
could
on.
fall under customary and incidental
Right.
to the distillery.
Okay.
Okay,
That's
it would be
fine,
under
I
that
didn't wanna get,
General feature.
I didn't wanna get jammed up, I just,
Right.
the difference between light and heavy,
Something to keep
as
thinking
pertains
of.
to I-1 and I-2, it seems to me, it's so
Yeah, it
minute
is.
that I would, I thought it would get a P in both, that's all.
But you, and you guys could change that,
Yes.
but the thought of the concept team was that milling is using raw materials and changing it into a finished product, whereas, and that is consistent with the definition of heavy industry, as
Okay.
opposed to
Yep.
light industry, which is taking that more finished product and turning it into yet again, the flour into bread is the light
Okay.
manufacturing, whereas
Okay.
the grain into flour is the heavy
That's fine.
manufacturing.
That's a good analogy.
Thanks.
So good, you threw your name.
We got a commissioner down.
Everyone knows who I am.
Yeah.
We know who you are. Okay.
Communications. Mary, what were the changes there?
This one was a little tricky. A communications tower in the C1, which is our very small end of the BNR, we don't have many of them, we will not have many of them in the county. That was permitted, but we had recommended that it be conditional pretty much because of the location and size of these properties. Tower complexes, we made less restrictive in the industrial, actually, we made less restrictive across the board. Our thought, as I recall, a year and a half ago, was that, basically the complex means more than one. So to have two, towers, you were still regulated by other restrictions. Tom and Clay, help me out.
Like
So
FCC
that-
stuff and
Yeah.
things?
Right, and as far as the setbacks from other properties and everything. So we thought that that should be less restrictive, across the board. So they used to be prohibited in the C1 and C2, and they used to be conditional in the industrial. And we made them permitted in the industrial and permitted in C2 and C3.
Now, the challenge
They
that
can
we
be in
get
the
caught
ag
up
zone,
on are
right?
that communication towers,
Communication tower.
technology's changing.
It's conditional use.
5G, they're not towers, they're boxes that you
Yep.
put on telephone poles. And we've got to be careful not to be too restrictive.
Totally different
Totally,
definition.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, these are communication, these are
They're the big
100-foot,
towers.
these are
Well,
big towers.
Just,
No?
there's boxes you see that putting on telephone poles, they're allowed everywhere in the county.
Right,
They're considered existing structures and you can put them on.
right.
However, if you look behind the courthouse, there's the new pole that they put up, new tower they put up.
Yeah,
That's a communications tower,
right.
because that meets our definition for a communication tower. And would have to go through the same process
Really?
as a 200-foot tall cell tower.
And that's my
Okay.
concern.
That's
As
interesting.
technology changes
It
and
needs to definitely
these
be
towers
different.
are being,
What's the
are
definition?
different.
so.
So let's look at the definition, maybe that's what you wanna change,
It's in the existing code, we didn't change it.
to make that distinction.
A communications tower is a structure to support radio, cellular, telephone, television, transmission antennas, microwave relay towers, monopoles, and similar structures for transmission or reception and retransmission of electronic signals. Communication tower includes accessory equipment buildings that do not have office space, which is the work that's on the ground. And communications towers do not include amateur radio operators. But otherwise, if it's for radio or cellular communication, it's a communication tower. And that's the sole purpose of that tower behind the courthouse, is to support cellular communications. So it fits our definition for a communications tower to a T. But like I say, if they're putting them on an existing telephone pole or a light pole
Yeah.
or any building in the county or anything like this, it's free game. Go ahead and do it.
But Jay, they can't go beyond a certain height, correct?
Right. The one thing they do is restricted, when they do that, is it can't be, higher than
Yeah.
Line.
1/3 the height of the
Yeah,
existing structure.
You have to put them on a pole or something.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
or,
If you look at the communications tower, we don't have a height, minimum or maximum, do we?
It's in a different section.
for a communication tower, no, we have no minimum and maximum height.
All right.
In-
So any
for-
tower that fits that definition, if
It's a
it's
tower.
this tall, it's still a tower. so it doesn't-
Theoretically, it's still a tower.
Gotcha.
So like say, if you put one out here on the telephone pole, if the pole is 30 foot tall currently, you could raise it another 10 feet and put the antenna on top.
Yeah.
Right.
And you could do that with this building. You could raise it, if it's a 40-foot building, you could raise it.
My only concern is that we don't become too restrictive on communication towers because technology changes and things, I mean, can become very laboriome in the acceptance.
That's everything here.
I thought
Changes.
But we've become less restrictive across the board
Yeah.
here.
Yes.
Yeah, this is less here.
You can
so.
apply that
Yeah.
across the board.
But with those small cell, towers, which is what's behind the courthouse and over there by,
McDonald's.
McDonald's.
One next to
and-
McDonald's.
Yeah, I mean, they're only like 20 feet tall, they're barely
Yeah.
as tall as a.
Basically, as tall as a telephone pole.
So I thought our communications tower did have, or is it anywhere that there is a height?
There's a
'Cause-
lot
No.
of, there is about
Communication.
2 pages of regulations.
Yes,
go
there's a
with
falls on it. We have
There's-
restrictions on falls on it.
There is a
If
height
it's an
restriction
addition-
in that if
visual
it's
from
over
historic
200.
Properties, there's all sorts of stuff it has
And
to
setbacks for that,
follow.
correct.
106
There is a height
reviews and
restriction
things like
in such that if the tower is over 200 feet, it has to be lighted according to the FAA. If it's under 200 feet, that's why most of the towers you see that they build are usually 190, 195 feet. So they don't have to be lit, which of course the neighbors love.
You just said that.
But if they're over that 200-foot mark,
Yeah.
they have to be lit.
Interesting.
And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding too of some of the 5Gs, it's in the more dense areas as well, they just don't
Right.
have the range now, but who knows when.
Yeah, that might change, but
Yeah.
you're only gonna see those in the incorporated areas.
Right,
You're not gonna
right.
see them out in the rural areas at all.
Not in your
Right.
district, right?
You need one.
I do need one. Hey, let's talk we're different subject, I'm sorry. Oh,
Keep
okay.
going.
Okay.
So,
So everyone's okay with communication then?
If it's high enough, you could light up.
Commercial.
the end of the county.
So now this is all the commercial categories, and we'll start with vehicle sales and service. And for this, we had a lot of discussion, and a lot of the discussion too came out of the field work. We did not realize until we started doing the field work how many independent car dealerships are in the county, as opposed to more of the larger corporate Mile One and Stoller. There's a lot of small sales, so we really had a lot of conversation about that. I'll just leave it at that.
Which is why we separated those into under
Yeah.
10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight, and permitted that in the C2 because we found all of those in our field work. But we made it conditional if it's larger vehicles, thinking that isn't necessarily always appropriate or might need some extra scrutiny. The other thing that's new here, believe it or not, car wash is not listed in our current code. So,
Nope.
No, not at all.
It's accessory.
right.
Oh.
So that is a new use, even though it's probably not really a new use.
What's
And
it, what's the accessory to?
Fuel
Auto
stations.
sales
Auto
service.
sales,
Yeah, but I
Service
mean,
station.
like,
Service.
Was it Duke's Car Wash or something? There's got nothing.
That's in,
Duke's
that's in
City.
Westminster.
I know,
Yeah.
That's the example that comes to my mind, though. That's not, there's nothing there except that.
Right.
So there's just nothing like that in the county?
No,
Nope.
The one on
Okay.
32.
currently, no.
I don't know what that would be accessory to.
You know what I mean?
Which one?
The one on 32, it's not accessory to anything, it's a car wash.
There is that.
I mean,
It might have fallen into another broader
It's,
category,
just
which
past
was.
Bristol.
Non-conforming
Oh,
or.
General.
Down
No,
at
it would have been
South
96
Yeah,
because we
yeah,
never
it's
had
true.
That's been there for a long, long,
Yeah.
long time.
Right.
That might have been there
Maybe
prior
that's
to
the type of-
65.
Yep.
That's why
there
we're
you
adding
go.
definition,
Right.
so we have
Okay.
something to do to address the standalone.
Yep.
So why, again, land, I don't wanna dissect these things, which I'm doing, I guess. Why wouldn't you allow a car wash in a I-1 or I-2 area?
Again,
Good
going
question.
back to those definitions of keeping I-1 and I-2 more for industrial. So again, it's that raw material, manufacturing, it's that assembly.
Higher employment.
Right, we don't wanna have our industrial land,
Diluted by.
correct, with car washes.
And they could still be accessory to another use within.
But it's a prime location for a heavy-duty car wash, you know, for a truck type of car wash. You know,
I don't know if we have any heavy-duty car washes in the county.
I'm
Most
just,
of the ones I can think of are,
so I could get a conditional use if I wanna put a car wash in an industrial area.
No.
If
No.
I wanna,
It would be an accessory use.
Like if you had a concrete manufacturing plant, you had to clean all
Right.
the concrete dust off your trucks, you'd have a facility
It
set
would
up
be
to do
accessory.
that,
Yeah.
yeah. I can see that.
yes.
That's acceptable, right?
Mhm. Yes, as
As
part of your,
accessory use,
Right.
yes.
your.
okay.
The old Bees distributing down in Pittsburgh,
Where?
DD Road, they did beer distributor. Anyway, they had a washing facility,
That was part of their business.
correct,
It's
So
an
that would have
accessory.
been accessory to their business.
yes.
Okay.
We're not just talking about a really large standalone in a park taking up valuable
Right,
land
it was
Right.
with
part of
the
their, it was
infrastructure.
part of their, right, okay. Right.
Well, pardon, on, you can have it when it's accessory.
Right, that's what we were saying,
Yes,
yeah,
it's
accessory,
on
not
page
as a
48
primary
on page
principle.
48 where it talks about that. On page
Right.
48 of the code.
I think they were talking about like in a big industrial car wash, I guess for, you know, big trucks and things like
Right,
that.
like you might find
Well, I'm
on
not
the
even
side.
talking about that, I'm
Oh,
talking
it's
about
just
if
a
I
re-
wanna put a car wash in an industrial area, you're telling me I can't.
Right,
Yep.
not as a standalone business.
Hire that
If you had-
attorney.
If you had
Industrial.
a 7-Eleven there with gas pumps and there's a gas station and everything
Okay,
there
that's
with it.
different, right,
Mhm.
You could
okay,
do that.
but standalone,
Yep.
Standalone, no.
right.
That's what the recommendation is.
Preserving that land
Yep, for
for the
industrial,
best and
yeah.
highest use.
And typically you see them on
In it's more
commercial
service.
areas anyways,
Yeah,
if
okay.
you think about the ones that
Okay,
we know.
If you want a car wash, come see me, we'll find you another.
all right,
Fine, just
that's on top of my brewery and just, I mean, I've got a lot going on.
Great idea.
Accessory use.
It's like my sides, my laundry.
You're all about economic development, aren't you?
Look, you know, commissioners, I will just say, this is the difficult part of having these discussions, whether it's at the staff level or with you, and probably with the public.
Right.
The next step
Yeah.
is that you staying focused on the zone
what's- I
and the
know.
Mhm.
purposes
And I know-
you know, what you want to do in those areas.
I know the good
It's
folks
very
of PC
difficult.
struggled with this as well, as I
Yes.
went through them, so.
And we even struggled internally. We may have a meeting and we were one way one meeting and then came back because
Right.
there was new examples or new discussion and maybe went in a different direction in subsequent meetings, so.
Yeah, I was
um,
part of some of these little debates.
Yes, so,
In
you know.
PC, so, you know.
But I think to Tom's point, that's what I keep saying, are you manufacturing, is it
I
raw
know, okay.
material, is it,
Okay.
you know?
And
It's
is it
just
a
on the
principal
surface, it
use?
seems
Right,
like-
and these are principal, that's another good
Right,
point. Like,
I gotta remember that.
Yeah.
It just seems like on the surface, man, that would be a good place to put that, but I get it. Okay. All right.
Any other questions under vehicle sales service for commercial before we go on to eating and drinking establishments?
Now we're getting somewhere.
Okay, here, a new use that we identified as catering establishment or banquet facility, and we had talked a little bit about this when we talked about the definitions last time. And then, we also separated out restaurant with a drive-through from just restaurant, so that, the drive-through would be prohibited in the C1, we talked a little bit about that, as well as the industrial and the employment campus.
And the reason our discussions were with prohibiting a drive-through in the C1 was because of the nature of the small neighborhood, like, you know, traffic, we didn't want it flowing out onto a community street. So that's why, through our discussions, we just felt it was not appropriate to have a drive-through in a more neighborhood residential area.
And not to jump ahead too much, but when you see that there's no restaurant permitted in the I-1 or I-2, that might look sort of strange, but if you have an approved industrial park, you can have up to 20% of commercial uses. That would allow your restaurant or any other service uses.
Okay.
So that it's not that you'll never see it in the I-1, oftentimes you will if they come in for an approved,
Okay.
It'd just be
industrial park.
conditional based upon that percentage.
It wouldn't be a conditional use, but it would be conditioned on being an industrial
right.
park, and you'd have to meet the percentage. So you will still see restaurants in industrial parks, because it can be an important component to those employment centers.
Keep going.
Okay.
We'll stop you.
All right, funeral and interment, this was, we had a lot of discussion here as well, and even more discussion in the residential districts. Also with crematorium was challenging as well, so.
But we made no
Yep.
changes to the current code.
So that
from
stayed the
current-
same.
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion about where it would be. Next was lodging. So bed and breakfast, your favorite, Country Inn, hotel's part of an industrial park, and motel.
We skipped over that death part real quick.
Yeah.
I mean,
That was the biggest subject we've seen.
Let it go, Eric. Let it go.
The funeral establishment, not allowed in C1. So, Haight Funeral that's not a C1 area on 32, that's up against residential?
No, that's C2. We checked, we were
Okay.
creating no non-conforming, we checked all the funeral establishments. We're
Yeah.
not creating any.
Y'all did your homework on that.
Yes.
On that one.
Yes.
yes.
I remember that coming up, and I think a similar question came up down in the
Planning and zoning.
planning zoning.
Yes.
PZ,
Yes.
PZC.
What changed in the logic? I'm sorry.
I'd like one thing to change, but we'll
Well, you
just-
love country inns, come on.
Best thing that ever happened.
You don't want it there?
Yeah, oh, it's fine. It just seems like there are so many things that are lumped under Country Inn.
We'll get to that in the.
Don't grimace at me, Tom.
I grimace about them all the time.
So bed and breakfast,
We make changes.
we left that in a C1 because C1 again was to serve as more of a neighborhood, again, thinking of, a little crossroads community, having the C1, having that be surrounded by houses. It could be a house that now is converted to a bed and breakfast. Similar with a Country Inn. And then with hotel, since it is a bigger use, we don't really have any C1 land that would be appropriately sited. You wouldn't want a big hotel in your community that it could be conditional in C2, permitted in C3, and permitted in employment campus as a principal use, again, because it would be supporting hopefully the employment that is in that larger community.
What's the airport zone is?
That's ag. Isn't that ag?
IR, light industrial, in the city code. It's in the city.
Well,
It's
actually,
in the
part of it's
city.
in the city, part's in the county.
Yep,
So,
Oh.
the runway's in the county.
would we be,
Runway's in the county.
would it be pointed to put an
business
airport, put a hotel right by the airport
Well,
with, I don't know what the zoning is around here, so I'm
well,
asking.
it's
Industrial
industrial,
park.
but that's in, I think what Paige just said, and I know the runway's definitely in the county, but the industrial park's in the city.
Yes, it's in the city zoning. There is a, and I can't answer to if the city would allow that within their zone, but I do know there's a 13-acre parcel that's owned by the county that has to be used for aviation purposes.
Right by the,
But
the
the
by
other,
the.
and the other thing is, how tall can you go if you're in that runway protection zone?
Mhm.
But specifically your
Hard to
question,
throw.
I don't know what the city allows.
You have an bed and breakfast zone, but what about an Airbnb that's used continuously?
Well,
Talks about
that's,
that a lot.
yeah, that's, a lot of communities are being challenged with Airbnb, and that would be in someone's house, and make it be an Airbnb on and
Yes.
off whenever they would want to
I
be an
say we don't have
Airbnb.
anything that,
And
about
that's
that
kind
at
of a
all.
residential
Yeah, that's
issue
very-
anyway.
yeah,
I mean, that
it's
would be
very
so
much
far,
residential.
so hard to enforce. I mean, it's, you
Don't
know,
you
like,
have don't you have something like that?
I think that would be part of.
Around there, yeah.
Around you, not you.
Yeah,
around
they've
you.
used it, been in existence for a couple years.
I think that would be part of the residential
would,
zoning
yep.
code. when we get to those definitions in that land, those use tables, we might be able to address that. But because to my knowledge, they're all current residences
Right, that
that
live
then
there.
transfer into temporary
Yeah,
or
homeless.
semi-permanent
To track that would be
Airbnbs. Yeah.
challenging, because some people live there, some people may have it as a second
Right.
house that they rent periodically. I mean, that would be.
And there's some areas, Montgomery County, I think, and DC have both been trying lately to regulate it.
Mhm.
It's difficult.
I think the key there would be maintaining a registry of it and just awareness more than anything. I
Mhm.
mean, but to regulate it's, I mean, that's gotta be a bear.
That would be very challenging.
Well, like with, like with the proverbial one-chair beauty salons and other things, folks open those up regularly, and then what happens frequently is a neighbor, or in-home businesses in general, it doesn't matter which one you pick on, a neighbor, for whatever reason, complains that there's a business being operated out of the home, and then they, it's a zoning violation procedure that they would go through. So if the board decided to create Airbnb regulations and they didn't come in and follow the proper procedure to get permission to do it, then it would be a zoning violation situation, I believe.
If we had the regulations
Yep.
Yeah.
regulating it, it wouldn't, if you didn't register it, then
Yeah.
it would be. But to enforce something like that it's impossible to really enforce it.
I'm not suggesting, I was just suggesting that would be the process.
I mean, you make up a good point. I've heard, reading some other literature, a lot of jurisdictions are struggling with what to do with regards to that.
Well, if for no other reason, most jurisdictions, including Carroll County, have a hotel motel tax. And these folks, these operations are basically a hotel or motel, and they're not paying that tax because they're not. So there's, revenue that's being lost. So I think many jurisdictions across the country, and maybe across the world, because Airbnb is all over the place, are struggling with that aspect of it as much as anything else. And making sure that they're safe, that they have, you go to a hotel,
Parking.
sprinklers all over the place, your home may not be like that. Not that everybody likes sprinklers around here, Commissioner Wance.
And one other problem with something like that also is, if you're in the house and you're just renting it to somebody, is that gonna be classified as a
Yeah, Yeah.
Airbnb?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah. I mean,
so
yeah,
it's,
There's been,
you start going down that path.
there's
yeah.
been
It's
a
rabbit
few
hole.
bills that have been introduced in Annapolis last year that addressed Airbnb, and they were all defeated. But we discussed them at length around the Mako table,
And they'll
all
probably
of this
come
is
back,
similar
yeah.
to what we heard there.
Yeah.
Because it's just, where do you draw the line on, inspections and everything else, so.
The realtors brought it
Yeah,
up too.
I know, so.
Do they?
In your discussions, when you were going down through this, did you go over what a bed and breakfast and a country inn are?
Yes.
Well, they are defined.
Yeah.
they each have their own
Yes.
definition.
Are they part of these newer definitions? or
No,
do
they're
you keep
existing, and the
them-
They're
basic difference is
existing.
the resident has to live in the B and B and does not have to live in the
The country
country inn.
inn.
Is that
Right, and a
pretty
country inn could also be approved for your banquet facilities.
I can't.
And you can also
I'm sorry.
serve meals to guests, whereas in the B&B, it's just
Yeah.
for the rent.
Okay. I just think well,
So we do define it, and there is a difference, distinct difference.
But we'll probably be revisiting that in our other,
that would
Parts
be
of the
very
code.
nice
Yes.
if you would
Yes,
revisit it.
in the
because
conservation and ag.
I don't agree with the definitions.
They
And
can be
there it
very
is.
problematic to enforce too.
Very, very. Once
mean,
again,
But-
it's very hard to enforce.
And I'm not suggesting we talk about it now.
Right.
But I think that we need to look at the definition of what one is as opposed to the other.
Right.
Because it appears as if there are times when one gets thrown into one, when it really isn't that one, but yet it's the only place to put it because
Well-
that's what we have.
Well, I think the challenge runs into when when people are trying to squeeze a banquet facility or a venue, an event venue,
Yeah.
and into a country inn, because as the code stands currently, there is no standalone definition for an event venue, a wedding venue, a banquet facility, whatever. So if you don't have the country inn, you can't have that. So people try to squeeze something else into the country in. I think now, once these definitions go forward,
Okay.
we'll have other opportunities for those.
And that's my point. I think, put a little asterisk beside them. I truly think we need to sharpen the pencil on the definition of each of those.
Why wouldn't a motel be allowed everywhere a hotel is?
It's not in the employment campus page, that really was,
The difference between a hotel and motel is,
Exterior.
yes, is how you get into the property. So is it interior hallways versus you drive up, that's a motel, you drive up
Right.
to the site, and so I think it was a
More
question more about
hiring
quality and
and
employment campus being that, upper, echelon of environment that we thought it would be, that a hotel would be suitable and a motel may
And
not
there
be.
didn't really say design standards, but there's a certain uniformity of an employment campus, a certain aesthetic.
Cohesiveness
Cohesiveness
and-
that you wanted to see in an employment campus that maybe a motel would not be as conducive to as a hotel.
And honestly, when we get to the employment campus and what the standards would be potentially for development, I think if someone was going to do an employment campus, they would not be likely to want a motel over a hotel.
Well, how about in the I-1 and I-2 then?
I think again, did we allow it all at all?
The hotels
Again,
part
it'd
of
be
industrial
Part of
park.
an industrial park.
Right, and I
But
think
what
it
does that
goes
mean?
back to that same question
Yeah.
about the car wash, like, what is the highest and best use? And again, we don't have tons of employment land of any category in any type of form.
Okay.
So let's try to preserve what we can
Okay.
for the best and
And
highest.
an industrial park, I wouldn't say it's quite of the same caliber as an employment campus, but similar. So again, it's to that, did you want a motel, kind of maybe changing the aesthetic look of what an industrial park would bring to the table, so.
Okay.
But if you're defining motel, as I would define it as well, with exterior entrances, it's not necessarily a low budget, facility. It's a exterior entrance. I understand motels that are out there today, but that's not to say a motel can be, in upper class, just exterior entrances. I mean, we gotta be careful. I believe we should be careful not to judge a facility on its, its merit just because of its name of motel or hotel. And a motel may be the appropriate facility for extended stay in these other locations. I just don't like that, I don't wanna say attitude, but an attitude that can be sensed when you say hotel or motel.
I think, getting back to, I think the idea was purely aesthetics, not so much price point, but it was more aesthetics, that it just looks better from a design standard when you have a business park or an employment campus. And I can't think of any.
Certainly for the employment campus,
Yes.
that was definitely
it's
a
whatever you
hotel. The industrial park, I mean, certainly can go back and look at that. I felt like did we talk about
When you have hotels.
transient?
That's part of the
Well-
business park, not the motel.
It should be hotel or motel in industrial park allowed, not just hotel
I
in
mean,
industrial park. So,
I would just want to preserve the
That
employment
was,
campus.
that was our rationale, it's whatever you all decide, that was just our discussions.
change it for
You
industrial
want to
park,
preserve
though.
the land for industrial park for industrial uses and not necessarily put motels in, is what I got from what you said.
yeah, but
Yes,
they're allowing hotels.
Well, I know.
hotels in an employment
Right.
campus.
Well,
And
Hotel as part of an
as
industrial.
part of an
park.
industrial
That's what
park.
he's saying is why should we have a motel, if we're gonna allow a hotel.
Right.
He's advocating add motel to that.
Only when you're right.
It's
I-
up to
I
the
don't-
board.
It's up to the board,
Yeah.
yeah.
So do you see Commissioner Rothson's suggesting that where it says in the second to last one there, hotel as part of industrial, they add hotel and motel, and/or motel as part of.
And the only difference being how you access your room.
As long as that's the definition we're using.
That's what I was
And
just.
we do
gonna-
not have,
I was
we
just
don't
gonna
have
ask that.
definitions for either one, either in the current code or proposed, so.
Well, in that case,
we should-
then we gotta be careful how
we
we're
should-
judging a
Right.
word, hotel and motel.
So should we
I
add the
agree.
definition?
Right, because does a
Yeah, they're-
hotel
Yeah, that's
If
include?
we're going to differentiate, we need
Yeah,
to
you
have
have to
that
Meeting rooms
definition.
and a motel.
One thing there might be a difference in the
That-
building code.
Understood, we need
So
to transfer
it's
that
not
to
in
the
our
zoning
code,
code.
but they do
Right.
have definitions for each one in the building code.
Yeah, we should transfer that definition.
Yes.
Let's do that. Yeah, we did.
Okay, we
So
had,
there
about a year ago, we did have those definitions in there, but we got caught in this discussion ourselves. Clay pulled out some pictures of motels where you accessed it from a,
Courtyard interior.
yeah, so
And I'm thinking like.
we ditched
it's
those and we
been
thought we'd just go on the common usage of the terms.
So it's Clay's fault.
Yep.
Yeah.
Does the building,
All right.
do we know whether, I guess, we don't have the building code, so we don't know whether that references a difference.
We'll find out and bring it
Yeah,
back to you
let's
all.
go back.
Okay.
Again, my biggest concern is that we don't see ourselves as judgmental because of an attitude
Agreed.
about.
Or
what a hotel
perception.
hotel is.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Good thought. Anything more on lodging?
Sleep.
Office healthcare. Ms. Mary?
So we did not, oh,
or
go ahead.
Oh,
Linda,
I was
sorry.
just pointing out that the medical cannabis was voted on by the Board of County Commissioners 2 or 3 years ago, and we did not revisit that issue because it had been so recently decided. Currently, a facility, the growing, processing, and a facility for dispensing of medical cannabis can only be in the IG, which will become the I2 district, and we kept that the same
Where are pharmacies allowed?
in all of our commercial districts.
Well, then, I can't see how you can keep cannabis out of at least one of those C1, C2, I don't know which one it would fit in best, but wherever pharmacy generally is, I think the medical cannabis facility should be allowed as well.
At least the dispensary?
Yes, the
Not
dispensary is
the
what I'm
grow.
talking
Yeah,
about.
not
Yeah, that's what we're talking
And
about.
that's what this is, the facility for dispensing.
Right.
And a pharmacy is considered
sorry.
just a general retail, and we have those on the next page. You probably don't want to get into that yet. Separated out by less than 10,000, 10,000 to 60,000 square feet, and then beyond 60,000. So
And we-
it's just considered.
And we did have the discussion about the location with, in business when we originally
Right.
looked at that.
I was bringing it up again. Because I think it should be allowed, we allow pharmacies. Just that's my opinion.
Well, the state also regulates, I think, the security, the setbacks
Right.
from
Yeah.
schools,
Well, that-
residences.
They would have to do all of that. They'd have to
Right,
make
meet
all
the state
those-
requirements are
Right.
fairly stringent.
So if the board wanted to put it in the commercial category, as well as the I2, would you
Yes.
just move it over to retail service, the dispensing, and get it out of office and healthcare? Or would you leave it there? Oh, because it's medical, I guess you'd leave it
Yeah,
there.
I think we would
Yep,
leave it
Never
there.
mind.
And just for clarity, so there's not.
Yeah,
confusion.
that way it can, people
Gotcha.
can clearly
Didn't-
see where it is.
Didn't the state also say we can't make it more restrictive than what they make it?
Then we just have to make it allowed.
Yeah.
You can't not have zoning for something that's a legal use.
Right.
So this was our way of,
You have to allow it
Allow it
somewhere
somewhere.
in one of your zones.
Okay, okay.
Should almost be the same as medical or dental centers.
That'd be my point.
Yeah, I mean,
That's up to you guys.
should we take a motion?
I think this one needs a vote.
So just as a point of procedure, wouldn't that have to be something we'd address as a, we couldn't just say, yeah, okay, let's just do it here.
Oh, yeah, because all these are sort of like your budget workshops where you're doing your mini votes and until you actually adopt the budget, you know, until you actually, this zoning code goes to public hearing
Yes.
and has all that vetting and you sit
Yeah,
in
I
those
only
big
ask it
seats up there.
because we did it in the way in which we did it prior to this. That's why.
Right, and this has to go through that same process yet. This is all discussion about, you know, what you're interested in. You know, nothing here is done until you actually adopt this, pass and adopt this ordinance.
Which
Yeah,
will
I
be
got
done
it.
in open session up there.
Yeah, I got a tough time putting those kind of facilities, my opinion, in a small residential area.
same as was medical or,
I got a tough time with that as well.
Tough time with what as well, I'm sorry.
Putting a medical or dental center in a C1.
Really?
I assume we have them, like
I
doctor's
guess we do,
offices.
because you guys
and-
did the legwork, so I assume there's some somewhere.
Well, we allow
You've got 'em
medical and
even in the
dental in
R20.
R20.
Do we really?
And we
Recreational use.
went ahead and recognized a lot of those, especially along 26 in the Freedom area, and moved them to C2 for the most part.
The Freedom Area is such a pain.
Stop it. Focus. This is, I mean, it's a tough one. And the whole cannabis, I mean, well, it is. It can be morally ethically tough because we're going through change on how cannabis is now being recognized and used. And, you know, we're relatively old and have other understandings of its use.
Speak for
And
yourself on the old part.
Did you
I
see what he did there?
I'm twisted on this one too, but, you know, the reality is, change is happening, and the use of medical cannabis or cannabis for medical uses makes medical sense. Therefore, it should be available to the community where other medicine and, you know, are available. To what Commissioner Frazier's saying, and it's really frustrating, and I'm agreeing with him over and over again, but this is something that we should consider.
So planning and zoning didn't even address this because of the fact that we
Correct.
made the decision 2 years ago as a board?
More, yes.
2016. October 2016.
I was this close.
Well, that's when the state law passed, and we didn't have
We had to
any,
address
any zoning related
Right,
to it.
exactly.
Every county was required to, basically required to change their, update their zoning ordinance to allow it someplace.
So is this something we should bring back in open session to you all for discussion?
Well, we can make the change now, and then we talk about it in open session when we try to adopt the whole thing.
So with the idea of
Just like
putting
we're
in
doing with everything else.
C2.
So that's why I was asking about
And
procedurally.
Industrial one?
You're fine. This is no different than any other
Yeah.
change you've
Right.
suggested. You're reviewing the entire zoning code. There's no, you know,
Except this one has a
has different,
moral
yeah, well, some,
taste to it.
right.
So the objective is to expand it to other categories.
To allow
Allow
it to
it
where
to
other
out-
medicine is being
Right, wherever a
distributed.
pharmacy is. Those is
I'm
allowed.
sorry, I don't agree with your opinion on that.
It's no
And I
different
think
than
it's
the
an
rest of the
opinion,
zoning code.
Because we didn't do anything else with any of these other categories, but this one specifically, we made a decision and debated it in
Well, you've
open
made-
session
Because
as a
it was
board of
brand new.
commissioners.
But
I'm
you've
sure
made-
if
matter.
something
But you-
else had
no.
We
come
didn't
up-
talk about restaurants.
If
But-
it was, if restaurants were never in the code before, and the restaurants now you have to allow, I think we would have talked about it.
Yeah, you just changed your zoning code for alcohol producers, for example. So, I mean, there have been changes to the zoning code all along. What has never been done for the last several years, many, many years, is this comprehensive look at the entire
Right.
zoning code. So this aspect, although is maybe controversial because it's got cannabis associated with it, it's no different than any of the other potential changes that you're making or not making, any of the other decisions.
What have any of us heard from that industry coming up? Like, what do they want? Are they saying they want expansion on this? Do we have a feel?
Well, what I've heard from the people that want to use, or have their cards, or whatever you call it, to use medical marijuana, they would like to be able to get it wherever you can get something else to make it more convenient. Why do they have to drive into an industrial complex in order to purchase something that is supposedly that is approved medically for them to use? Why can't they get it the same way as you get your whatever pills or whatever you might have to take?
And that's why you
That's
see
what
it in
I-
Howard County on
Yeah.
40. You have medical marijuana dispensaries on Highway 40 of 2 or 3. I mean, that's, so,
That's a tough, that's a bad example.
oh, I know. I don't like
That's
it.
not in a not in a small residential area.
Yeah, I don't like this, because it's against moral fiber, but it is being used in medical, you know, and it's been recognized that way, so we should
Let's take a look at like
look
what
at
the
it that
municipalities are doing and other
Yeah.
jurisdictions are doing, and we'll bring back something as a
Yeah,
proposal to
I was
you
just
all.
gonna
Yes.
suggest that, Tom, and then
Okay.
I'd also like to see the numbers of medical or dental centers that are in C1s, or right now would be R20.
Well, we put those in C2, a lot of, C2 is really based on location, a lot of them are along 26, 32, 140.
Okay, but you're suggesting that we allow all those in C1.
Yeah, like a small dentist office. We'll look and see what we have. I don't think we have anything that's in C1.
I don't think we do either. We
Yeah,
have
but
so
for the
little
future, we
C1.
were.
But you said that we did. You said you went out and looked and there were,
No, we were saying they were in
BNR.
residential.
oh, okay.
Too.
And
in
in
the-
BNR, but most of the,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
No, got it, okay.
Yeah, no, so
Okay.
you're saying, yeah, they're in residentially zoned areas currently, but it made
Right.
sense to convert them to.
Okay, you know what my problem is, and that it is what it is with that. I just have a tough time with a dispensary in a C1. I'd probably be fine in a 2 or 3, a C2 or C3, but in a small residential area, I got a tough time with a dispensary being in the middle of those.
Small
That's all.
commercial.
That's
I
all
have
I'm
to
saying.
back- I'd have to
Let's
back
take
him
a
up
look,
on that.
because we may need to look at a dispensary, whether it's equivalent to a medical dental center or whether it's a retail.
Okay.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So
Right.
let's take a look at all that.
Okay. Yeah, we need
Rather
more
than get-
information. This is
let us
extremely
take that
controversial.
discussion,
Yeah.
We'll come back to you.
We
Okay.
could also bring you the
I'm with
state
you on that, buddy.
requirements that
Okay.
show
Yeah, just
the safeguards.
Yeah, we'll
on that.
refresh your
research.
memory on that and have another
Yeah, I'm with
conversation.
you.
We'll see what the municipalities
There's
are
a
doing. We'll see
compromise
where we have the
somewhere.
C1 located, so you can see where that is. And then we'll give you a tally to the medical and dental centers too.
Okay,
and
that would
where-
be helpful.
Yep,
Yep,
and where
cool.
they are, and what they were, and what we've
Got it.
suggested
Okay.
them to be.
Do you want to we have just a couple more on that finish up office and healthcare,
Okay.
and maybe we stop there?
We'll pick up then at
fine.
recreational entertainment. And I think too, Mary and I were talking, and we didn't do this last time, and I apologize, but we're taking notes like we do for our work sessions, and we will have that to distribute next time, so you can,
See where we were
yeah,
and where
see
we're
where
going.
we are, where we left off.
Okay.
No, sorry. So again, starting with professional, I'm sorry.
No, go.
Professional or business office and the parks and the veterinary facility with and without runways. That was a big conversation amongst our group.
Will the animals have medical marijuana?
Perhaps.
Not in the C1.
The one place we did make this more restrictive is currently in the BNR, you can have a veterinary facility without runways, that top one, permitted, and we recommended conditional just because our C1 is such the lower end of our BNR, and as you said, in residential areas, that we thought it could be appropriate, but it could need the extra scrutiny of a conditional use.
Yeah, and you don't want dogs barking or things like that in a neighborhood. We have special requirements on when you have a kennel and how the distance requirements are, so we don't want to cause an issue there. Catteries are different.
I just have them barking all over the place in my neighborhood. It's not veterinary.
Yeah.
So you're saying runways, kennels, is that what you're referring to?
We're talking about the exterior runways.
So are we addressing kennels somewhere else?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But exterior runways could be just for pre-surgery or whatever, the animals do not spend the night, that's,
Right, but I think still, as the animals are outside, if it's a dog, it barks and didn't want to cause a nuisance. And,
It's a goat that does something.
and there may not be, but it could cause a nuisance issues and conflicts that we didn't want to see happen.
And we did define for the first time veterinary facility, and we went over it last time, but any boarding of animals may only be during their convalescence and accessory to the facility use.
Right.
So kennel is a whole separate use.
Yep.
Any concerns on that one before we wrap it up for the day? Or do you want to go 5 minutes later and do recreational entertainment? I don't know. It's up to you guys.
It might take longer.
Are we halfway?
No.
Not quite.
No. Wishful thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to get to page 56, so 13 more pages.
But it doesn't really
I mean,
look
can we
like
go
that.
through the next two categories,
Yeah, why don't we-
recreational, retail,
And
and
finish
stop?
Okay.
Yeah, let's stop,
Thanks.
let's stop prior to residential. That's a good idea.
All right, that's a natural break.
Yeah.
This area, believe it or not, talk about the cell towers and how rapidly that's changing. Recreational is changing really at warp speed. So we had a lot of discussion back and forth about this, especially in the industrial area. I mean, you see there's a lot of adaptive reuse in our industrial zones with trampoline parks, gyms, gymnastics facilities. I know I said it as a joke last time, but it is true. Axe throwing, things like that. Top golf now. I could see indoor golf ranges being
Escape
even.
rooms are being.
Yep, escape
used.
rooms, things like that. So we did have a lot of discussion about that. So that's a lot of the recreation entertainment covers indoor just as much as it does outdoor discussion. And so you see here, we're kind of like XXXP, PXC. I mean, it is all over the place because of the nature of this industry.
And the two areas where we became more restrictive were in the I-2, which is currently the IG. You can do a lot of the indoor and outdoor recreational things by conditional use, but we didn't feel that was the highest and best use of our heavy industrial property being so limited. So we recommend that that be prohibited. And also indoor theater is a brand new use,
So,
What is an indoor?
like a movie theater.
the first one, the adult entertainment, business, all that kind of stuff. If we go with the definition that you shared earlier, what is the best use for that area? I'm not sure that's the best use for industrial location.
right.
I mean,
And I
if
too.
we're not allowing a car wash,
Well, we had to allow it somewhere.
This was a
Right.
holdover
Yeah.
from
Right.
how many years ago, and it was
it's
thoroughly
right there on the
discussed.
canvas that some people don't agree with.
C1 might.
True, and honestly,
Second, was that a motion? I'm sorry.
I must be missing the good stuff over here.
Commissioner Weaver suggested C1.
Yeah. Everyone's blushing.
Honestly, with that one, I think, if I recall, the
Yeah.
group just said, hey, it was IG, let's leave it alone,
Yeah.
because we had to allow it according to state law,
Somewhere.
And that's honestly how that ended up.
I would recommend if we are looking at cannabis, medical marijuana being used wherever in other jurisdictions, that we take the same look at this category across other jurisdictions. Again, if I'm looking at what is the best use for locations, I may not agree with, or I may agree with, these categories. It's regardless. It's what is the best, it's going back to what you shared earlier.
Yeah.
So did we look at this as it pertains to current establishments that do this in the county and where they are?
Well, they
Because I
can
think
only
there's a
be
couple.
in the IG unless
Now.
they're legally
Now,
operating.
where they are now. You did the legwork on these now?
That's an adult bookstore.
We didn't find any.
We didn't find any.
Maybe-
Legally,
maybe
legal.
it's not obvious from the outside.
Okay, well, I know there's one in Finksburg only because I go
That's a
by it all the
bookstore.
time.
How do you
That's
know
a
that?
bookstore.
Because I go by it all the time. It's a big neon light that goes adult thing, something, whatever.
It's not a,
It's by the dentist
There's no
office.
it's not a striptease business or a massage parlor or.
But still, adult entertainment.
No, at one
I'm
point,
gonna say we didn't identify.
there
it.
wasn't there one on 26 at 32, or one
What
proposed
do we consider?
in one of those strip centers? No pun intended.
A couple of
Do you
little
recall,
property
anyone
owners.
recall
I
that?
don't recall.
And that's when I thought we really had to tackle the issue.
So
Do you remember the one in Finksburg? I think there was a court case that went along with that.
Yeah, that
in
was the
Finksburg.
massage parlor.
The one that's
Yeah.
currently there?
Yeah. Well,
Okay,
different.
yeah, but if,
Well, I know, yeah.
if we can take a look at it, the way we take a look
That's
at
in
the other,
downtown.
I would appreciate it.
There was one in
Downtown.
Finksburg, wasn't it?
The court case was the
Hampstead? Okay.
Amusement park.
The town. Was it
That's a book. No, it's business.
So we're not all under the adult store, which is adult business,
Yes,
but
that's
we
what I'm-
allow that in B and R.
It's possible they're non-conforming, they're legally
Yeah, I mean, it's been there for a long time, I do know that.
I don't-
Like I say, it was before my time.
Yeah, we'll have to, I agree with that, we need to look
I
at it.
know there was a
Not- not
massage
because-
parlor in there at one
Let's be
time
clear, we're not
they
trying to
shut
open
down.
up the world here, but, let's be
Okay.
fair as we move forward with
Yes,
this thing.
absolutely.
And whatever you call that one, again, I see it all the time when I go by.
Yeah, I drive it every morning,
and
I pass it.
I actually go to the dentist, which is right around the corner, so you can't not see it.
Right.
You keep telling us that.
I knew it was bad when I was, I knew it.
But we got more things to get through. I mean, we don't see much
All right.
revenue generated in that category. There's other things on this list that are more important.
By the way, you're slandering the massage business in that category. You are.
It's part of the current definition and part of the
It's a-
current regulations.
There's a legitimate massage business out there, and it's a major thing. It's not always a bonus.
That's
Yes.
something to look at
So
also.
that's-
Well,
yeah,
in the
la-
definition, that is separated out.
Yes.
Okay, the definition clearly says that, because
Yes,
yeah.
They have to be a licensed
Because it would have-
definition,
Okay.
Yes.
massage
Okay.
parlor, and
Mhm.
All right, okay,
Just one of them all.
okay.
massage.
So are there any other issues with any of these?
No, the only one I would have, I know that there, and only because I know that in a neighboring jurisdiction, there's one that's opening. And sorry, I'm taking your thunder, but.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. I'm glad you brought it up.
Our thinking, were
Right.
in a neighboring jurisdiction, they've opened up an indoor shooting range, and I think it's on Owings Mills Boulevard. And I think it's in an industrial area, which is where it should be, really, because of the, although they've created a great facility. If you're standing outside, I don't
It's
even
in
think you'd
I-1.
ever
We
hear
allow it in
I
I-1.
allow it in I-1.
Again, we didn't feel it was the highest and best use of
For an
I-2.
I-2.
A lot of
Okay.
times when we did this, we had the map in front of us and we saw how limited our I-2 is, and we
Okay,
were
I'm
trying
talking,
to make sure.
okay, all right, indoor, got it.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I was
Yep, so
looking at
you're
the
good.
outdoor. Yep, I'm good, sorry.
Yeah.
But there's nothing allowed on the outdoor, and we have
Outdoor,
a
yeah.
shooting range in the county. How does it work?
That's an
Ag or
Ag.
conservation.
It's an ag, yeah.
Okay.
Not in these zones.
Yep.
Is that the same thing for a tree facility in a riding academy,
Yes.
a boarding
Mhm.
stable,
Yes.
it's allowed somewhere else?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an
Okay,
ag,
'cause I
right?
see all the X's
Yes.
across.
Ag,
Okay.
conservation.
I
Okay.
gotcha, all right.
Yep, I got it. I
40.
got the two.
And the golf
messed
course.
up.
Yep.
Right, yeah, we already talked about that.
Now, the next is retail and service. And this is more of the general retail, our strip centers, things like that.
And anything that's pulled out was for a reason needed to be treated separately than just the three categories of general retail.
One of the ones we went really back and forth on was the rental of vehicles and goods with primarily outdoor equipment storage. We had a lot of discussion about that, like the Benz rentals and things like that.
Where do we have, or we're not calling out breweries?
It's
That's
farther
coming
down.
out.
It's
Yep.
coming, it's coming up.
That's under industrial.
Steve's already researched that one.
These are commercial, those would be industrial uses.
Yeah.
And these are strictly retail. And service, I'm sorry.
So breweries currently, okay, I got it.
Okay.
Small scale brewery, okay. Got it.
And we had talked a lot about, if you all recall earlier, the general retail square footage with the 10,000, 10 to 60,000, and more than 60,000. We talked about not only with planning commission, but we also talked about with this body, the board, the former board, to talk about. I think we had 100,000 square foot, and then we brought it down to the 60,000 square foot based on a lot of discussion. So that's not new. Those parameters.
And other codes, this is really the direction that the other codes are going toward, rather than trying to list individual uses.
Right.
Just by square footage?
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
unless there's something unique about it that makes you need to pull it out separately. Like fertilizer sales is different.
They're shouting from the peanut gallery.
Is it general service?
No, it's car wash, we covered it about half an hour.
It's already pulled out.
Okay, anything else in those areas?
I don't think there's anything else to point out. Do you, Mary, Tom, Claire?
We talked about butcher shop last time.
Yeah, butcher shop.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, you've got the homework assignment, and
Yes.
if as we're going through this, if any of us see something that comes back out, we can certainly revisit. I mean,
Absolutely, and if there's something ahead of time you want to shoot an email to me, I can distribute to everyone, and maybe we can, research something prior to our discussion. Also, we have 2 more meetings in the month of January, so how we've scheduled it is this same time frame, the next 2 Tuesdays now, the 22nd and the 29th.
Did you want to talk about this?
We haven't gotten to that point in the use table, so when we get to the residential, I wasn't sure how far along we would get. And I did want to share that particular comics was very germane to the conversation coming up with residences in the commercial industrial.
All right,
Great work.
that's it. Thank you all for today.
Adjourn.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I'll do
Good
this
job.
official. Boom.